Okay, so my name's Sam Rosen. I'm a professor at Temple University. Thank you, the organizers, for including our paper. Excited to share it with you all as well. So as I'm sure, especially the people in this room are aware, there's been this emergence in the last few years of a new class of digital assets, non-fungible tokens or NFTs. A large fraction of these assets represent claims on either digital artwork or collectibles, some of which has sold for seemingly absurd amounts of money. And me and my colleagues, we looked at this new class of assets, and beyond their peculiarity and their large valuations, we think this is an interesting asset class to study. And in many ways, we actually think it's also a misunderstood asset class. Should we think about it as art, a consumption good? Oh boy. It said to ignore it, so I'm just going to listen to the advice. All right. Or should we think about it as a financial asset, a speculative good, or I guess I'd say at worst, just a bubble, some sort of speculative bubble. So in this paper, we propose a new framework for how to think about NFTs and the NFT market. And specifically, we posit that you should think about NFTs as veblen goods, or that is goods with a large social aspect to their demand. Real-world examples, you can think about luxury watches, Ferraris, or nightclubs. And one of the salient characteristics of these types of markets is that demand always seems to exceed supply, right? It's almost a feature, not a bug. And if you think about this from a classical kind of economics perspective, you ask the question, well, why don't producers or issuers just raise prices so that supply equals demand, right? We were just talking about this in the last session paper as well, equal supply and demand. And the answer is that demand for these types of goods can be fragile. This isn't a novel insight that we proposed. This is actually something that was originally suggested by Gary Becker in a 1991 paper, where he looked at how equilibrium outcomes for socially valued goods differ from privately valued goods. And so we take his framework and we formalize it. And with our model, we derive three key predictions about how socially valued goods should differ in equilibrium. And then we validate these predictions in the data. So these predictions are that primary market outcomes should be very bimodal. There should be significant underpricing in the primary market. And then finally, there should be scalpers out there that exploit this significant underpricing to earn seemingly abnormal profits. Right? And I want to just highlight here that these are all predictions that specifically come about from including a social aspect to the demand. And then we find all these factors in the data, which allows us to conclude that, yes, we should think about NFTs as digital veblen goods. So I'll go through this part quicker, because I think that I'm assuming a lot of people here have heard of NFTs before, but just in case, they're digital goods, digital assets, which means that they're held in blockchain wallets. If you can verify ownership of any given NFT just by knowing the public address, but of course, if you want to do anything with them, buy, sell, or otherwise transfer them, you need the private key to the wallet to do so. Right? And relative to cryptocurrencies, NFTs, just as their name suggests, they're both unique, indivisible, and non-fungible. So in our paper, we focus on these types of collections that we call them generative collections in the paper. These are NFT collections that are roughly 5,000 to 10,000 objects per collection. The NFT jargon for the primary market sales, you refer to them as mints. And actually during the mint itself, that's when the NFT is also created on the blockchain. Right? And these collections are highly advertised in advance through social media and websites. And this is just kind of a general sense of how these primary market sales go. To give you a very tangible example, this is the Subducts collection. Now, this isn't a random collection because this is actually a pretty successful one. And so when we say generative collection, we refer to these ones where each individual item is associated with a unique piece of artwork, but all of the artwork has a common theme, and each of the individual images are essentially variations on that theme, such as a cartoon duck with different features, right? Maybe Bored Ape Yacht Club is the one that's maybe more well known, right? But all the collections in our sample kind of look like this to some extent. So once NFTs are minted, they can be traded through online platforms such as OpenSea, where users can browse available for sale items. They can list their own items. And now let's talk about why people buy NFTs. Right, this is really at the heart of this paper. And to start off this discussion, I'll refer to the Twitter profile picture feature, which was rolled out, I guess, at this point about 2 years ago. So on the left-hand side, we have my co-author Anthony's Twitter profile. And he's opted for the classic picture of himself. And we know that his profile picture is not an NFT because it's got a circular border to it. Compare this against this other profile here that is chosen to use an NFT for their profile picture. This person, for their profile, because it's an NFT, there's a hexagon border. And if one were to click on there, they would be able to verify on the blockchain which specific NFT they're using. And so this person on the right is able to credibly signal a couple things. One is that they own an NFT from this given collection. And two, that as you may know, this is a very successful collection where these items sell for, even to this day, at least $50,000, for example, the kind of cheapest items you want to buy in this collection. So this person is also showing that they're able to afford this type of luxury good, right? And they're showing it off to the world so everyone can see. All right, so we view NFTs as digital, durable status goods, right? Where the example I just went over is one way you can kind of signal your wealth and status through your NFTs. But they're more than just that. They also can give you access to members-only spaces, both online, Discord channels or other similar places, as well as real-life events. So I actually had the pleasure of presenting an earlier version of this paper at NFT NYC a while back. And one of the things I noticed was that these NFT collections would host these parties and get-togethers where you had to have an NFT to get into the event. But these events were cool. They had celebrities and other people, and there were fun events where you had to have an NFT to get in. Now, finally, just kind of in a more general sense, being part of an NFT collection also gives you access to the network of other NFT holders. Where anecdotally, I could name a lot of examples of people essentially benefiting from getting to know other people, both personally and professionally. Right. So this is really, I think, the utility argument for NFTs is that they have all these consumption benefits with a social component to them. Now, of course, you also saw, especially at the beginning of this market, these really large returns. And this, of course, would induce speculative traders to want to enter the NFT market for the purpose of making profits. All right, so in our paper, we do have a whole kind of conceptual framework of a formal model that I mentioned earlier. Given the time constraints and such, I'm just going to give you really kind of the key takeaways here, as well as I do want to sell the intuition behind this. So this is a global games model where this is basically you have a set of consumers who are deciding whether or not to participate in an NFT sale. And global games models are these models where everybody gets these noisy signals about the quality of the NFT in the collection, or the quality of the collection. And the really crucial part that drives all of the key empirical predictions is this part up here, this part at the end there, about how the utility of customers directly has a component that is increasing in the amount of other people that demanded the collection. Right? So you enjoy an NFT more if other people wanted to participate in the sale. Then you have an issuer who sets the price in this primary market, and they're trying to maximize profits.
This is your fire life safety director. At this time, testing has been concluded.
All right.
Please resume normal activity.
I think they also turn off my mic too. All right. So finally, we have scalpers in this model as well. These differ from consumers because they don't have any fundamental utility or social utility from owning NFTs. They're just there to make a profit. So if they see an underpricing, they'll come in there, try to participate in the sale, and then turn around and sell it. So you combine these elements together, and particularly you include this social component of demand, And we get the following counterintuitive results, which is that we would expect to see bimodal outcomes, meaning that this NFT collection launch is either going to completely sell out or completely fail. And when it does sell out, in fact, it's oversubscribed. So the collection issuer in the model actually rations this item and has to randomly assign it to people who demanded it. Then there's this significant underpricing where the issuer would ideally raise the price further because in their own maximizing interest would like to charge a higher price and earn higher profits, but they can't precisely because of this social component of demand, which introduces a discontinuity in the demand function such that if they raise prices even a little bit further, demand collapses and the sale completely fails. Right, and so that's where this underpricing comes from. And then finally, given that there is underpricing, the scalpers in the model do in fact purchase in the primary market and just turn around and flip it on the secondary market. All right, so we study, now back to the empirical side of things, we study 700 of these collections. We gather collection level info and such, but really crucially, we also have the transaction level data, which we get just straight from the Ethereum blockchain. So there's about 6 million transactions, covers the period March 2021 to March 2022. Right, and blockchain-based data is awesome. You get to see buyer, seller, price, date, really all the key information that you couldn't get in any of those other markets, like the art market or other ones that I might say are similar. And we have both the primary market sales as well as the secondary market. So one of the first things we established, just as a stylized fact, is that you should think about NFTs within the collection as being relatively homogeneous. And we're able to make this claim because if you run a regression of prices on collection date fixed effects, those collection date fixed effects, just knowing the collection and the date, explains over 80% of the variation in prices. Right, and this comes in handy for some of our empirical work, but just in general, it's interesting to realize that so much of the variation in prices really is at the collection level. And so you should think about the goods within them as being relatively homogeneous. All right, now on to the predictions, right? So we're basically going to go prediction by prediction and make sure that each one of them is true. So in the primary market, we have this nice histogram here where on the x-axis is a measure of primary market success. It's how many items they sold relative to how many items they wanted to sell. And we can see that there is a mass on the right tail, where about 50% of these collections sold out entirely. And then there's a mass at the left tail, where the remaining 50% essentially failed and sold very little from their collections. So this confirms our first prediction from our model. Next, we go to the underpricing. And so for this, we're going to start using our transaction level data. So we can define a measure of realized returns, given all the data we have, where these are all going to be after fee measures. And before doing any formal regressions, let's just look at some pictures. We see the picture on the left shows you the aggregate weighted average realized return, where the green bar are sales where the original purchase was a mint, and then the orange bar are purchases or sales where the returns where the purchase was in the secondary market. And we can just see there's a huge difference in these average returns, right? Mints on average delivered about, or on the weighted average basis, 195% return compared to about 38% when purchased from the secondary market. Right, so it looks like returns for mints are substantially higher. We can validate this in a more formal regression setting where we can control for a variety of things, including a multitude of fixed effects. And essentially, we confirm that finding, that mints produce a per return or per trade return about 100 percentage points higher on average than secondary markets trades, which is just a huge amount of underpricing to think about. So finally, we're going to talk about scalpers. And this one's a little bit more challenging because when we're thinking, we have two jobs here. One is we need to find scalpers in our data. And the second thing we need to do is we need to show what they're doing, and the way they're earning returns is through this scalping behavior that we hypothesize. So in terms of defining scalpers, rather than just looking for the behavior we want to find, we actually use a simpler sorting method. We just look at the traders that trade the most. Right? So we have a more formal procedure of how we do this, but essentially it's just we look at the traders who are doing the most of the trading. And we end up defining a subset of these traders as, let's call them potential scalpers at this point. If we look at their activity, And we look, for example, on any given date, the relative number of trades they do that are in the primary market, we see that basically every day throughout the early part of our sample, scalpers are doing more relative trades in the primary market. Right? So they're already leaning more towards making purchases in the primary market, which will become relevant shortly. We also see, when we look at their primary market purchases, that they're much more likely to turn around and sell them in a shorter period of time. So this is a histogram of just how many days it takes you to turn around and sell your primary market purchase. The red bars are scalpers, the black white bars are non-scalpers, and we can see just the higher mass in this left tail telling us that 40% of primary market purchases by scalpers are sold within the first day, compared to only 30% for the remainder of the sample. All right, so we see that this proposed scalpers do in fact participate more in the primary market, and they turn around and flip their items at a higher rate. So now let's look at their returns. So it's a similar graph to before, where I'll just focus on the left side one for now. This is the weighted average return to scalpers versus non-scalpers. And the weighted average return among scalpers in our sample is about 71 percentage points. Compare that to non-scalpers, whose weighted average return is about 56%. Right? So everybody in this market is making money on average, especially during the sample we study, but it appears that this scalper group is actually earning a higher return. And this is potentially a problem for us, because according to our model, all these scalpers are doing, or all they should be doing, is just exploiting this underpricing. But what if they're the smart money? What if they're the informed traders that wouldn't support the story that we're trying to sell here? Right? So they appear they're in higher return. Let's take a closer look. So, okay, we can validate this on the trade level formally, that they do in fact earn a higher trade higher return per average when we look at control for things. But in terms of this idea that maybe they know what they're doing more than everyone else, we can actually construct a variable for every given collection that just says what fraction of the people that participated in your mint fall into our scalper category. And it turns out that this variable is highly predictive of collection level success. Right? When we first produced these graphs a while ago, we said, wow, these must be the smart money in this market. Right? In terms of likelihood of success, the higher fraction by scalpers, higher probability of success overall, as well as these types of collections sell out faster if they have more scalpers participating. Right? So you might think, okay, yeah, this is even more supportive that they know what they're doing. But when you actually look within the trade level return data, you realize the story doesn't hold up so well. Specifically, when you control for whether or not the previous trade was a mint, so this is the third column in this regression table, we include a dummy for whether or not the previous trade was a mint purchase, suddenly their return advantage completely disappears. So they're no longer outperforming their non-scalper peers. And then when we look within the set of just primary market purchases that were eventually sold, they actually underperform. And this really isn't consistent with the idea that they're informed or have any sort of specific advantages, because they're actually doing worse relative to non-scalpers when you focus just on primary market purchases that are eventually sold. Right, so they underperform. So, well, why do they underperform? Well, I have a regression table to support this in a moment, but I'll just tell you in the kind of visual sense. What we figured out is that these scalpers in our data actually follow a strategy of jumping into successful mint sales right towards the end. Right? So this chart on the left shows like the weighted average time to join the sale, and the scalper group tends to join much closer to the end of the sale, essentially when it's already looking like it's going to be successful. Now, for those of you familiar with the Ethereum blockchain, you also know that, especially in the time period of this study, this type of time period could also be associated with a lot more congestion, meaning that gas fees will be higher, or even just people trying to crowd in at the end are willing to pay higher gas fees to make sure that their trades are executed. And so we also see towards the end of sales that gas fees tend to be higher. So the bottom line is, when we look at it, that underperformance I just mentioned is entirely driven by the fact that the scalper group pays higher gas fees when they participate in primary market sales. Right? So this is their strategy, which, to conclude, this isn't a strategy that suggests they know what they're doing in any special way. Instead, it suggests that they understand that these primary market sales are deliberately, optimally underpriced, And they exploit this by participating in primary market sales and then turning around and flipping these items, exactly as we modeled them in our conceptual framework. All right, so another interesting fact is that most of the collections in our sample, even among the 50% that originally succeeded, do ultimately fail by the end of our sample. So most of them are 50 to 75%, depending on you measure, are worthless. And this is all just to say that you might be worried that we're, have some censoring issues, where our results are, missing these unrealized sales. Bottom line is all of our results do hold when we include some sort of measures of unrealized gains based on price indexes constructed from trading activity later in the sample. All right, so there's a few interesting implications. I think I'm just about out of time, so I'll skip some of these. But the one thing I do want to say, given the session I'm in here, is you may say, all right, this is great. I've learned about NFTs. Now I have a better way to think about them as digital assets. But what does this have to do with DeFi? And the short answer is that now that NFTs are more of an established digital asset class, there are protocols out there that are allowing people to use their NFTs as collateral. So if you're either participating in or interested in studying or understanding these, an understanding of what these digital assets are in the first place would help design these types of protocols, as well as understand the risks that are involved given the types of assets that are being used as collateral. All right, with that, I believe I'm out of time, so this is my conclusions, but thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you and getting any thoughts you may have.
Great, thank you for the talk. We have time for a few questions. I had one. I think you skipped over the bullet point on access. Like, you can't prove that there's no access difference. I think if you look at like this as, okay, most of the successful mints are full, and maybe the scalpers know how to use the MEV tools better to get in. Is that also a potential explanation of their increased returns?
If you wanted to define their advantage as, I guess you'd say, being able to program bots that participate in these sales, then I guess yes. But my point is that that doesn't mean that they kind of know which collections are better, that they have preferential access per se. And actually, it fits perfectly in with kind of an assumption in the model I didn't talk about, but the model actually views scalpers as being able to, through some sort of technological advantage, kind of see demand and jump in at the last minute. So if anything, that's kind of maybe a justification of why you could assume that in the model. But I think really the key aspect here is that they're not informed in the sense that they don't know which collections are being successful. They're just able to essentially scalp and do it well.
I'll come back to you, Alex. Okay.
Your sample period happened to coincide with the time when prices were going parabolic. Has it held up if you run it for the crash side of the bubble?
So maybe this is at a journal right now. Our referee actually raised a similar question. So the short answer is we're working on it. But my hypothesis is that actually it will hold up. I'll say some of our preliminary evidence, and I mean I think our results are driven. They're all relative comparisons within the market as well. But certainly it's a relevant question that we'd like to be able to conclusively say.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's just intuitive in any market, but I do recall that there were a lot more projects once the crash started that just went straight down to zero.
Yeah.
So that would even impact things like whether the scalpers were profitable in what they were doing. So
that's true. No, I think it will be interesting where, I did mention how even if you have, you include all the unrealized losses, right? The mint premium is still 40 percentage points per trade, even including those. But, this could have shrunk further in the market as well. And I guess from our perspective, as long as it's positive, that's kind of what we need. But then again, I think you're right. Quantitatively, it could have gone down.
Don't people wash trade a lot in this market? And then other than wash trading, there are also other incentives. I don't know, exchanges provide incentives to trade, right? So how would you take care of that? And do you think that it's a significant problem?
So I think that's a great question. And I'll actually take this opportunity to briefly highlight mention that my colleague on this paper, Sebum, he actually has a paper all about NFT wash trading. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about what he shows. But one thing is you're definitely right. There is some notion of wash trading. And actually one of the most kind of egregious examples of it is there's this exchange called LooksRare, where it seems like an open secret that everybody knows these are just fake trades. So actually we dropped that from our transaction level data because we know those aren't real trades. But actually at a more fundamental level, and this is more kind of what Sebum's paper talks about, wash trading does seem like you'd be incentivized to do it, especially in the NFT market. But it's actually pretty costly to do. So there's a lot of fees, there's royalties, there's exchange fees, there's also just gas fees, right? So there's a lot of fees. And so as much as I agree with you that you'd think that there's an incentive to want to pump up your collection and such, one of the counterbalancing factors, which this is what Sebum shows, is that he actually identifies wash trading behavior in the blockchain and basically shows that it doesn't seem to work. Right? You can kind of identify these wash trades, and as much as volume predicts price increases, if it's wash trade volume, it actually doesn't. And actually, all the wash trading that he does find, LooksRare being an example, seem to be motivated by these like exchange-based rewards, where the idea is they're not trying to manipulate the price collections, they're just trying to manipulate these, I'll say, poorly designed reward schemes that incentivizes fake trading behavior. So in that sense, I'm not worried about it so much in terms of collection prices or having an impact on returns, but it certainly exists. Although I guess Sebum's paper also shows to a smaller extent than you might think. But it's a very, very great point.
Awesome. Let's thank the speaker. The next